Hi and welcome to Called and Caffeinated. I'm Stacey Summerow, your host, and today's episode was inspired like 6 months ago, and it's taken me this long to film it. It's just a little side story about mom life. I've had this idea for the episode. I actually recorded it with my husband, but my little baby he doesn't sleep very well, so we have almost no time to record when he's asleep. Anyway, he ended up recording it with us, and he was our guest a little bit too much. He had a little too much to offer. Finally getting around to recording this. Should you have a list for your spouse, for your future spouse? And if so, what should be on it? This one might be controversial, but if this sparks anything in your brain, please let me know in the comments below. And while you're here, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with whoever needs this episode. So let's start with a good time to have a list. I think if you are young and you know that you're impressionable and that you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be meeting a lot of people, let's say you're going off to college and you're 18, you potentially might have trouble drawing boundaries. That would be a great time to make a list. I'd say collaborate with girlfriends you trust. Come up with a list of some non-negotiables. Don't make the list too long. Don't let it include things like he needs to have a six-pack or whatever, but rather make it more about values. So is he someone who's going to either hopefully share, ideally share your values? It's okay. I think it's totally fine to say in your list that you would like to date a Catholic man or a woman. I don't think that has to be a necessity though. When I was single, I got to the point in my dating life where I realized, I really, really want this to be a part of my future. It's such a massive part of my life. I will be open to Christian men, but I really, really want someone who's Catholic. And so I think that's okay to have that as a condition, but I would say try to hold it a little bit loosely because you don't know exactly what God's going to have for you. But everything on your list should just basically be there to rule out massive red flags and make sure that that person is going to live with you in accordance with your values. When it comes to what comes to mind in a college situation is chastity. Even if a guy says he's Christian or Catholic, he may not respect your desire to follow the church's teaching. And I don't know why I feel like I'm speaking just to ladies. I'm also speaking to the gentlemen as well, of course. Everyone comes at this topic from kind of a different perspective. So make sure that the person that you are considering dating does have actually those values that they're going to share with you and respect when you set those boundaries. Another time when it might be appropriate for you to start a list for your spouse is if you know that you have boundary issues. This takes some self-knowledge and soul-searching, and I think it's really important to know yourself. With that being said, let's talk about when you should not have a list. I think that you shouldn't have a list if the list is a thing that exists to try to help you take on less liability. When you get married, you are taking on another person. You are taking on someone with all of their wonderful qualities as well as their faults and their failings. And if your list exists purely to minimize risk to yourself because you're taking on all of their faults and failings, well, I don't think that's a good reason to have a list. I see a lot of people who are frozen in their path to discernment because they can't seem to get beyond the first date because they find it too easy to rule people out. And as a general thing here, I'm just thinking of people in their 30s and maybe into their 40s who can't seem to quite get interested enough in someone in order to consider committing their lives to them. Now, it could be that genuinely those people are not the right ones for them, or they're not ready, or they do have massive red flags. And so yes, you should be picky, you should be discerning, and I'm not going to stand up here and sit down here and say, just marry the next person that comes along. Not at all. I'm just noticing that there is a lower and lower marriage rate, and there is a lot of frustration from both Catholic men and Catholic women about not being able to find a spouse. And I know a number of frustrated young Catholic men and Catholic women, and I wish I could just find a way to get them together because they're all fantastic people. And I think the devil just really loves to just paralyze us, and one of the ways that he likes to do that is with a list, an expectation that this person has to be this certain way. At the end of the day, a person wants to be loved and appreciated for who they are. You want to have fun with your spouse. You want to just really enjoy them. And that's going to give the beauty to your marriage. When you are more interested in protecting your own interests and your own concerns and having things the way that you want them, that's when marriage becomes cold and sterile. And if you're approaching dating from that perspective, I think that also is a little bit of a recipe for just never committing to anybody and never being able to experience that joy. It's only in really openness and surrender to the otherness of the other person that you're actually going to experience them and be able to receive joy from all the beautiful things that they are. You have to surrender to each other, and that's the way that it is joyful and that it moves forward and that it becomes something larger than itself. And I know there's a lot of people who have seen either sterile, cold marriages or marriages that fell apart, marriages that were dysfunctional. And so it's very natural to say to yourself, well, I don't want that for my life. And so I'm going to make sure that never happens to me, and I'm going to have my list and I'm going to stick to it. But unfortunately, because people are people, you may have a list, and the perfect person for you, not saying perfect person, but the person that God intends for you is still going to come with messiness, and God is in the messy. When we're speaking about marriage, I think a more important question and a better question to ask is, do we share each other's values, and are we looking together in the same direction? And that's going to be a really great starting point for a jumping off point for a great relationship. I think it's also worth noting that if I had had a list before I met John, he wouldn't have met the criteria. There were like multiple things that he wouldn't have made the cut from. One of them was that he didn't have a job. He was jobless, but there was a good reason for that. It's because he was helping his grandma for a year and a half. She needed his help and living with her. So he didn't have a job. He didn't have a car because he was helping his grandma. So he didn't have time to save up money. And then he had an art degree, so his earning potential was like not great. He wanted to be a monk, and so he didn't really care about his income, so he went and got a degree in fine art, and he's an amazing artist, but he wasn't on track to like have majorly successful gallery showings in New York or anything like that. With that being said, like John, when I met him, I just so enjoyed his company, and I felt a sense of openness. He wasn't quizzing me on I didn't get the sense that he had a list when we were talking, and his openness and kindness made me really just want to get to know him better. And so I also didn't have a list in my mind of, do you check all of these boxes and therefore we are a good match? It really flowed naturally from just enjoying one another's company and having deep conversations. And very quickly we knew that we both wanted the same thing. And very quickly, John found a job and also went back to school and graduated with his degree in sonography. And he's really done a good job being a provider for us. So the issue wasn't that he didn't have a job, and therefore that didn't indicate that he didn't have the potential to earn enough to be to provide for a family. It's just that the life circumstances that had been handed to him up to that point didn't lead to him having those kind of things that might have been on my list had I had one. John and I were reflecting that you don't marry someone static. You marry someone who's going to change. And in fact, in our 7 years of marriage, I cannot believe how much about us has changed. We're still the same people, but if you had shown me looking back at myself then, and if you had shown me a snapshot of my day now, it's like I'm like a totally different person. I do different things. I think different things. I have 4 children now. I have a lot more responsibilities and a lot less of those like fun times, sparkly things that we used to do. But we are very proud, both of us, of what we're building together. And so life just looks so different, and you can't control the challenges that are going to come up. So if you're trying to like marry the perfect person, well, guess what? They're, first of all, not going to be perfect. Second of all, they're going to change, and new challenges are going to bring up new things inside of yourself that are going to cause you to have to look back at your childhood and deal with all of your stuff, dealing with all your stuff. Marriage is like designed to bring that out of you. And so if your list exists to kind of block that process, to say, I don't want to deal with my stuff, then you're actually blocking God's call for your life. I found the reality is that as we get older, we get more set in our ways. We get more used to doing the things that we like, more used to doing our routines the way that we like them. And it gets harder and harder the older you get to kind of imagine stepping outside of that and being really flexible and adapting yourself to someone else. And so if your list is a way of keeping in control, not to say that you shouldn't have any control over your dating life, just that if your control comes before God's voice in your head, then you could actually end up blocking the person that you are called to marry because you are more interested in keeping things the way that you want them rather than being open to receiving the fullness of someone. I know that there's a lot of frustration in the dating world, a lot of frustration, and I totally sympathize and empathize. And I also totally understand that when you are frustrated, the first thing you want to do is control something. You want to control something, and that is natural. But we are called to live supernaturally, to surrender our expectations to God and surrender what we think we need to God. And so this supernatural call is difficult. It's difficult as a single person. It doesn't get easier when you're married because then you also surrender your marriage and your future to God then as well. But if you are a single person and you're feeling frustrated and you have your list and the list is maybe excluding a lot of people from potentially getting married, then I would just encourage you to surrender your list to God and see what He has to say about it. And really think deeply, is this list helping me grow towards an open relationship in which I appreciate and love someone? Or is this list making me judgmental of other people and making me just block them? I've said this a million times before on my channel, but all you need is one. Even if the dating scene is crazy and a mess, which it is, you only need one. You don't need the dating scene to be easy and perfect. You don't need 100 people who you could potentially marry. You just need one. And so pray for that one. Don't worry about whether the dating scene is a big mess or not. And that's my encouragement to you. And I hope this episode helps you. Hopefully I haven't left anything out or explained something in a way that doesn't make sense or doesn't sound like compassionate to the people I'm speaking to. Yeah. And finally, if you're looking for a gift for yourself or for other people, I have this beautiful, oh, it smells so good. It's vanilla and oak, and I made this candle. I made it. It's made of beeswax. It has a crackling wooden wick. I don't know if you can see the jar very well, but it's this beautiful embossed purple jar. I have, I think, 10 candles now in the lineup that I make for the Catholic All Year Marketplace. And you can head on over that way. I will leave a link in the show notes. I think it's market.catholicallyear.com. I'd love if you would support my channel and the work that I'm doing with the purchase of a candle or 2 or 3. And I also would love if you would consider joining my Patreon community. Beautiful people from across the country at all stages of life. We have some people who've been married 30 years, some who have been married who have teenagers, some who have young families, a lot of single people, and we all get together and have video chats twice a month, one of which is the Rosary, one of which is just an open video chat. We have new members joining. It's absolutely amazing. And we recently just met up in person at my house actually earlier this month, and it was so amazing. I just love each of them so much. And we're gonna do it again next year, no question. So we're building this beautiful community. We love when new people join us. Oh, and I wanna thank Catherine Floreno for joining. I hope I said your last name correctly. Thank you so much for joining my Patreon community at the level of Caffeinated Champion. And we'll catch you next time on Called and Caffeinated.